Hello my beautiful hammerhead and welcome back to another video. In this video I'm going to tell you about all the events that are occurring in Dawnbringer's Book 4, The Mad King Rises. And yeah, a lot happened here, that's why it took so long. So I'm not gonna diddle-daddle and we're gonna dive right back into it. Just as a refresher, in the last book, our Twin Tail Crusades, well, they were battered. Basically, on the Ghyran side, Kragnos did a number on them, and the Axian Disaster, what it's now called, has fought against the Idoneth and the Corn Worshippers. So, and unusual, but this time our story starts in Ghyran instead of Akshi. And this kind of tells me that we're probably going to get a sixth book, because then we have 3 times the beginning in Akshi and 3 times in Ghyran, and it kind of makes sense. So, but as I've said, this time in Ghyran. Despite everything, our Dawners were lucky that they had the Sylvaneth as allies, even though it was just for a short time. Because of all their foraging skills combined with the bountiful gifts of the tree folk, well, they had full stomachs and they had plenty of reserves. Well, at least for food. And yeah, but the Sylvaneth, they took off because Belthanos was still, hunting the ogres. And yeah, as the herald of the stag god, many of the jade-blooded Dawners, they went after him, because the hunt called to them. A couple of those, however, stayed behind, and it was a little bit unsettling, because they started a little subcult in the crusade, which themselves called the Kin of the Stag. And those cultists grew a little bit wilder day by day, performing rites upon captured beasts, leaving their posts, the guard posts, to hunt, just to return draped in bloodied skins. And the decision was made to just let them go, let them hunt, because that's obviously their thing. And you don't endanger everyone else because they're leaving their guard posts. But the priests of the cult Unbroken, however, had other problems, because Nurgle, as always in Ghyran, is active, and here and there the Dawners fell to the call of the Lord of the Flies, because the usual stuff: despair, wandering off and following the sound of bells. And not only that, but there are reports that King Brot is still active and somewhere to the south. And of course no one wants to cross the beast that slew Garda Steelsoul. But Marshal Isla Thorian has now the title of the Dame of Leaves, and she's herself became more and more the anchor for the Ghyran crusade. Embracing her druid side, which she discovered in the last fight against the ogres and Kragnos, she helped the crusade to cross paths which would not be possible without magic. We of course have the Jaded Circle, or whatever, the green cloaks, and yeah, but she has a special connection. The magic, however, probably comes with a cost. She's not sure on what, she just feels it eating at her from the inside. And the crusade finally reached the neck of Verdia, so the small passage with the 2 seas left and right, so east and west, or west and right. West and east, if you're saying like that. Oh man. But something was in their way. It was a wall of bones, and it was built by the dead. It was the Oziark Empire. And after weeks of marching north, The crusade was at an impasse. Because a solitary figure stood atop the abominable wall, which, by the way, had cracks in it where vines and aquamarine pushed through the bone, so like through rocks and everything. But that figure was the liege Horrocks. First time we hear that name, by the way. He told the Dawners to turn back, as everything that happens in the neck is Shaishim business, but that's not how that works. So they could turn back in peace, or they could settle in front of the wall, of course for a small fee of bones. But they would not have to pay the tithe for a century, so only at year 101 they would have to pay the first bone tithe. Yeah, because the Oziak Bone Reapers have more pressing matters behind the wall, so they don't have the time to attend the bone tithe. That is something serious. That is not something usual. And yeah, no one trusts the liege, because obviously. And as they did not have any other option, the Dame of Leaves tried to stall the liege while the crews of the artillery were trying to figure out where they could bring the wall down without getting everyone killed. And it was Thorian's senior officer, the Bombardier Major Esmeld, who survived the onslaught of Nighthaunts, and she had a special hatred for the followers of Nagash. But she was sure that the structure was fallible. Maybe it was because of Alariel's right of life or something else, but it was clear that the wall has seen better days. Tired of waiting, Horrocks ordered his legions to open fire on the crusade, and the Mortec crawlers hurled their deadly payload onto the mortals. And do you remember the Hallowed Knights in Book 3? Of course you do, because we believe that every single one of them left the crusade to bring back the wounded and those who weren't able to fight to Hammerhal Ghyran, but apparently some of them are still here. And as the artillery opened fire, the Stormcast stood in between the Dawners as shining beacons of light. And that's it for now with our stone golems, with thunder golems, because they were just mentioned here. And that's it. Now the Castlite formations did not shoot balls of lead or other metals as a primary source of destruction, but giant seeds. Combined with Thorian's magic, the seeds stuck into the walls, and out of them burst roots that shattered the walls. The original plan for the seeds was the defensive mechanism for their settlement, but that's not an option anymore, because the roots and the vines were just so thick that it would be a defensive wall for, as I've said, the settlement. With the breach now open, the mortals forced their way into the valley of the neck. Marshal Thorian, however, paid a price for her actions. Not only was she unconscious, but the fingers on one of her hands turned to bark, just like Alariel's barky hand. All of this was witnessed by the vassals of the Summer King. The news of the mortals breaching the walls should reach their lord. So behind the wall, the mortals were lost in a labyrinth. So groups were separated, wagons were lost, and with Thorian still unconscious, there was no hope of getting the contingent plans up and running. And the labyrinth was stuffed with nightmares, castle ruins atop the walls, trees with half-eaten corpses hanging from branches. In the end, what saved them was something no one expected. In our short story video, we already knew that Astoria Soulbright and her retinue glimpsed the crusade from afar, and that's who they saw right now. So they came face to face with Marshal Thorian, who awoke from her involuntary slumber. But the Lady Arcane had not the time to aid the crusade as she was on her own quest, even though she took note of a growing number of Dawners who insisted on going to the fortress on top of the peak, as the somber king would surely help them. A deal was struck between the Dame of Leaves and the Lady Arcane. She and her senior officer, Esmel's Wallbreakers, would aid the Stormcasts in their investigations if the Stormcasts would escort them through the neck. So as they reached the top, the majority of the Crusaders were concerned about the handful of zealots who were really in favor of entering the fortress. So they, of course, took precautions. They took aim at the entrance, and the doors opened. The Flesh Eaters, of course, emerged. But this was no attack. No, please remember in our short story video when Ushoran said that the followers of Sigmar should be invited. And that was it. The honored guests were welcomed by Sekar himself, who was also not pleased to be here. You can imagine that the inside of the fortress is nothing like the royal palace the court imagines it to be. They escorted our group to the dining hall. The seating did not make sense at all because Ushoran made the seating plans. And everyone sat with their weapons in their hands, and as they looked upon the questionable food. With a bone-shattering blast of ancient horns, more doors opened and a host of guards paved the way for the glorious and horrifying figure that tailed them. Ushoran, the Summer King, sat upon his throne. The Dawners who saw him saw a regal figure resplendent in shining armor. Asteria saw the truth, a monster. And a monster that was used for its blood. Because we know that Sekar and Gormain are, well, they're using him as a big wine casket for king's blood. Every time he got agitated, the vampires of New Lamia leaned in, whispered something in his ear, something inaudible, and he just mellowed down. So no one expected to pity the Summer King, because he obviously was a tool. Something else that no one was expecting was the Mortarch's chivalry and his desire to hear the stories and exploits of the Lady Arcane. In an attempt to gather information, she asked him about the Somber Paladin. The Nulamians were uneasy, but Ushoran remembered his old title from, the old world, telling him of his myths, his legends, and his nobility. After a long break, the Mortarch stood, raised his arms in a wish to issue a proclamation. However, at the same time, Sekar and Gormain conspired as usual, as the whole situation was not ideal for both of them. So, with just a small warning to Gormain that he should prepare some lies for his Mortarch, the Fang of New Lamia hypnotized Bombardier Major Esmelt to stand up, pull her flintlock pistol, and pull the trigger. And while she pulled the trigger, Gormain looked upon his king, and the first horn of summer echoed through his skull, and the feast began. So the silver bullet struck Ushoran in his chest, and to the surprise of everyone, he toppled into the table just to pick himself up and run away like a wounded beast, because, yeah, he's delusional. He thinks that a small bullet will, wound him dearly. As soon as the Mortarch left, Esmelt was ripped apart by the Flesh Eaters, because makes sense, and the Sigmarites retreated and killed everything in their path. Gormain disliked this assassination attempt, but understood the logic behind it. Ushoran is a wild card. To her horror, Sekar saw that her handmaidens were also being ripped apart by the crypt monsters. Gormain was gone, and she realized that this was part of Ushoran's plan. He allowed himself to be shot so that he could unleash his cohort upon everyone who he deemed unnecessary. The Nulamians were pressed hard, but like any other vampire who's worth her blood, Sekka had a contingency in mind. She uncovered several tunnels under the fortress, but the ghouls knew their lair well and were already waiting for her and her fellow vampires. It was Ghyran who waited for her, not the co-conspirator from just a moment ago, but a monster whose eyes were filled with madness. In the fight, she lost sight of him again as he slipped away, but Sekka and a handful of her people were able to escape. Parallel to all of that, Astria, of course, followed her own path, a path that was paved by Ushoran. Tracking him down to his library, she was awestruck that Ushoran is not as delusional as we might have thought. He even tells the Lady Arcane that the soul-blind vampires only see what they want to see. So the tool, and the delusional tool. And that his theatrics are pointless with his court because he just enjoys it so much. He used the mortals to get rid of Sekka and her kin. However, Astria sees through this delusion as well and accuses him of being weak. So too weak to see what he has become, because that in itself was also the delusion. As the rest of the Stormcasts caught up with both of them, the court of our lordly king also arrived at their heels. In a desperate attempt, Astria tried to get her hands onto certain books, but before she was able to, Ushoran beat her down, feasted slow enough on her flesh that it took a while before she was freed from the torment by thunder and lightning. Marshal Thorian and her group were beset by all sides. It was only Ghyran's intervention that saved their lives. He let them go in peace as a token of gratitude, and their healers would look after the wounded mortals. So with a heavy heart, she ordered everyone to move. So they moved, leaving the wounded behind to the noise of rending flesh and breaking bones. Yeah. Tears were not uncommon within the host of the Dawners. But yeah, the surviving Dawners reunited with one of the groups that was lost in the labyrinth, somehow Sub-Marshal Karas, also the first time we hear of that person, and her group just walked through the labyrinth without anything in their way. They even found an untarnished spring from which they drank, so lucky. And that was it for now in Ghyran with our brave but depleted Crusaders. Before we go to our sister crusade in Akshi, we have 3 short stories in between and not at the end like in the other books. So Corgus Cool is still active in Akshi, Vendis is apparently close, and that's it. That's probably gonna be book 6. In Shaiish, the Osiarchs are ordered to retreat back, even though they were winning against Stormcasts and the cities of Sigmar and everyone else, but because Catacross knew something and he did not share. So the order was just, everyone come back, something's happening. The other thing is Manfred von Karstein is invading Aachen the Black's land in an attempt to find something useful, so some kind of artifact, but what he discovers is rats. Lots and lots of rats. So this Skaven are suspiciously active this time of year. And yeah, if you don't know, in Broken Realms, Aachen was thrown off the plate of Hish, so he will be back at one point, but in another form. So, Akshi, we're somehow starting with Lorca Y, the matriarch of the Avengori dynasty, The chimerical centaur vampire, the amazing model, she was preparing herself in a watchtower for a battle against the Castellite prince Wadrai, and that fight was decades in the making. The watchtower was attacked by our crusaders, and she was just meditating in there, so she was disturbed. The animosities between the Avangori and the Castelli were no secret, but the latest developments were the last drop in the barrel of fuel before it was being thrown into the raging fire of war. And so maybe you don't know, but the Castelli are not easily challenged, as their fortress, the Crimson Keep, randomly teleports across the realms. But somehow every 107 years, on the day that is said that Nagash devoured the Cinder God, the keep appears at this specific spot. So if you don't know, I also recommend the book The Last Volari. And yeah, but down there under the watchtower was not the prince. As I've said, it was our crusaders firing their weapons at the Avangori. And despite her misgivings on fighting someone else before she could fight Wadrai, she dove into battle. Angry at herself for losing control, she remembered the teachings of the Askurga Rankai, so the samurai vampires, and she knew how to make an example of these foolish mortals. A metallith was near, and she would do whatever she must to punish the Sigmarites. And this metallith held the primary aqualith for the crusade and was guarded by the Black Talons. So it drifted a little away from the crusade, and our small group of heroes volunteered to bring it back, even though it would have been easier if the fanatics didn't assemble the wheels of the steam wagons. Because of course. Before anyone could stop her, the Mother of Nightmares reached the aqualith and spoke an incantation. Neve just reached her a moment too late, and the incantation was done. She was knocked down, almost fell from the metallith, so Neve, but bloody salvation arrived in a surprising manner. Crimson Keep materialized on the horizon. Lokawai had to honor her agreement for the upcoming battle, so she and her brood left the Crusaders alone and flew towards the keep. But to the horror of the mortals, the aqualith was already tainted. Tainted. It wasn't water that was coming out, it was blood, so it was bleeding. The departure of the Arangori was surely not a victory. With the main water supply corrupted, the crusade would suffer. So it was Nomus Ashtar, now acting commander after Marshal Malcorn's sacrifice and truce break in Book 2, who accused the Black Talons of failing to protect the aqualith. And you know, him being a puppet of Pontifex Zenestra, he was kinda safe in his accusations against the Stormcasts. The taint of the aqualith was just too strong. The priests of Sigmar weren't able to, well, cleanse it. And it was Neve's idea to attack the watchtower, so everyone just pushed blame onto her. The accusations sparked a fire between the cultists of the Wheel and those veterans that watched the rise of Zenestra's cult with disdain. But it was Hendrik the Silver Wolf who stepped forward and spoke the truth. He told them how they helped the crusade against their enemies over the last few weeks, but ultimately they are hunters. So it was simple, the Black Talons left the crusade. Alone again, the struggle became real. The mortal defenders were gone, the primary water supply corrupted. The Order of Logisticians calculated that their task of moving east is now nigh impossible. But the answer to that is easy. More prayer, more zealotry, more dedication to the wheel. But of course, not attaching those wheels to the carts or the steam wagons, because that would make everything easier. Those who spoke in defense of Neve spoke of conspiracies in the great conclave of Hammerhal itself, because why else would Talia Vedra be recalled from the crusade just after 10 days? So they flocked around another figurehead, a junior officer named Thungist Smalt. Even though he was young, no one doubted his skills, and there were rumors that Marshal Malcorn is his father, so he was probably the illegitimate son of Malcorn, and yeah, there was a resemblance between those two. So we have the difference between the pragmatists and the fanatics, and both factions were at each other's throats. In one night, the alarm horns woke many Dawners, and they were ready for a fight. But the fight was not coming. There was movement, but the movement went away from the camp. Smold and his followers took many supplies and left. Before they were too far away, a couple of the defenders threw away their weapons and armor just so they could run after their comrades without being slowed down. Zenestra let them go, because now only the strong and the true believers were here, and undiluted by the concerns of supply and logistics. Because it was she who saw the possibility of saving the aqualith. The answer lies in the Crimson Keep, or rather the spot where the Crimson Keep was just the day before, as the keep is drawn to places of power, and this power can be used to cleanse the aqualith. Hopefully. But would it be salvation without pain? Of course not. We should also not forget that it is not only humans that are in the crusade. At this point in the crusade, we also have elves and Duardin on their way to the source of power, because for whatever reason they had some stayed with the human Dawners, but stayed among their own kin. Even some of them converted to the wheel faith. The majority was arguing with a metaphorical wall, because the cultists of the wheel did not listen. Also Dawners that were either duty-bound to Talia Vedra and wanted to see the thing to its end, or the ones who did not want to commit to Smolt's renegades. Only Zenestra was steadfast in her beliefs, and on their way to doom or success, many Dawners perished. Many dipped their weapons in the blood of the fallen martyrs, or crushed their coin malleus into bullets, which of course was forbidden, because the coin malleus is something sacred. Oh, and the fallen ones were immolated, and the ash was just collected for later uses. So, our Dawners had just a slight problem. A problem that would see them with only one path up the mountains to their destination, as every other path was just too steep. And this path was stricken by an unnatural storm. Some tried to explain the phenomenon as a sign from Sigmar himself. That detail was the lightning that randomly struck the steel helms and turned some of them also to ash. The more they walked, lucky for them, the more the storm receded. And as they reached the ruins, it was clear that the Crimson Keep was here. Signs of combat were to be seen, as the two rival dynasties went at each other's throats, literally. Relics were taken, but some remained. Relics in the form of urns containing sacred ashes, branded with a round sigil. More and more of those rounded sigils were uncovered, but no one dared to take the matter up with Zenestra. So there is something malicious behind that. Probably. Far above our mortals, something stirred, something undead. And with a howl that would freeze your blood, 3 mortis engines with a cohort of zombies and skeleton warriors appeared, but it was not a fight, but a warning. There is a pattern here. A warning to leave the corpse city, so that the undead might prepare the ruins for the return of the Crimson Keep. But as always, Zenestra, being Zenestra, ordered her troops to attack. There was no strategy in this fight. The mortals did what they wanted to do, and just a few followed their Castelite training and the undead followed their imperative of Nagash to see the living slain. Zenestra's mouthpiece was slain, but she really did not care. The cannons fired, but the undead magic saw them rusting away to bits. But the Pontifex was the light in the darkness. Her soul shepherds poured the ash of the fallen dawners around the corrupted aqualith in runic configurations, and for a brief moment, as the power of the ley lines was drawn into it, Zenestra's body began to glow and almost went translucent. A circle of light shot towards the sky and destroyed the mortis engines and those unfortunate enough to fight in close proximity. It was worth it, as the undead lost their leaders and became target practice for the Dawners. The greatest victory was now the cleansed aqualith. Our mortal friends, shocked at this divine event, threw themselves at it and tore others away just to still their thirst. Because, yeah, makes sense in the realm of fire that they are thirsty. That was basically it with our Twin-Tailed Crusade. The only thing worth mentioning here is that the last surviving members found catacombs beneath the ruins, so here in Akshi, with glowing emberstone veins, and a buried city of the dead that had nothing in it. Just the rumors of scuttling feet, so probably Skaven again. So when that was it, it has to be an open end, of course. So we're going back to Hammerhal Akshi and to Usharan and Ghyran. In the Cinderfall district, Callus and Toll have met the lady with the Sphinx cat that is going to be a model in the near future, and she tells them of Trithusa and her splinter cult in the Daughters of Cain, so the ones that follow Morai Hag. And in Ghyran, Neferata summons a bloody avatar to talk to Usharan, so basically FaceTiming him, and warn him of his doings. But Usharan, being Usharan, dismisses his sister in blood, and yeah, that's it. So there was a lot of talk, but not much happened. I hope I was able to convey everything in a fashionable manner here. Again, the Ghyran side way more interesting than the Akshi side. I just hope that Akshi will pick up a little bit and not be a single-minded venture of zealots and fanatics. I mean, that fits the theme, yes, but it does not make for a good read. That was also one of the reasons why this video took so long. But yeah, what are your thoughts on all of this? Please leave your thoughts and questions in the comment section down below. I am keen to know what you have to say. And while you're down there, please remember to do all the YouTube stuff, not like me, because hitting buttons is not only fun. Why? Because that way we can build a bigger community and talk more Warhammer almost every day. But until then, have a great day, my friend. Stay fantastic, stay hydrated, and I will see you in the next video. Bye, bye, bye.